"Welcome, my slave," were the first words she said to me, even though she knew I was there to give my greetings to her family formally. I couldn't believe my ears and exclaimed in surprise. My fiancé's mother smiled while observing me closely. "Oh, with such a poor-looking expression, weren't you a slave after all?" Hearing this, Dylan, the husband I trusted, betrayed me unexpectedly. Glancing at my face, Dylan chuckled. "You look like a pauper. I'd like to see what your parents look like." Actually, well, they might faint if they came to a rich household like ours. Dylan and his mother continued to despise me. Unable to endure being insulted further, I discreetly sent a message to my father while they weren't looking. He immediately replied, "I'm on my way. I need to get some fresh air outside." I could no longer bear listening to Dylan and the other slanders. "Ashley, don't run away." Dylan's unpleasant laughter echoed. I left the table and decided to wait for my father's arrival. Just 10 minutes later. "What?" Tony's mother, who should have known my father, was shocked and stiffened her face. "I am Ashley White. I turned 30 this year. I work as a clerical worker at a small company called Simpson Machinery, and I've lived inconspicuously until now. Therefore, I don't wear flashy makeup, just basic cosmetics, and I choose clothes mainly in navy or black. I wear glasses with strong, thick lenses. The reason I've been so thorough is as follows. My father has a noticeable job, and I've been influenced by it since I was a child. He is an actor. He was very popular when he was young and was often surrounded by women when he went out, as I've heard. He frequently appears on TV, often in supporting roles, and has a certain level of fame. In middle school, I faced many difficulties because of my father. Classmates would ask for his autograph, and their parents would pressure me to meet him. Because I refused these demands, I was often criticized. I was seen as crafty. I also experienced harassment from classmates who envied me. I didn't want to trouble my father, nor did I want to be seen as boasting by those around me. To solve this problem, I intentionally dressed plainly and went to a high school where no one knew me. Fortunately, the name White is very common, and I was able to lead a normal life in high school. Thanks to my modest appearance, men didn't approach me, so I could spend my school days without worries. I love talking about cartoons with my friends, and that's when I feel happiest. I was inexperienced in love when I met my fiancé Dylan at work. Dylan works for a company that handles leasing for copiers, which are frequently used at my workplace, and we didn't have many interactions. He would come periodically to maintain the copiers and occasionally exchange greetings. Our relationship changed the day the copier broke down. That day, I was working hard from early morning to prepare documents for a meeting the next day. However, during my work, the copier suddenly stopped. I was at a loss. Without it, I wouldn't be able to prepare for the meeting in time. So I quickly contacted Dylan. He promptly came over and started checking the copier. "Can you fix it?" I asked worriedly. And Dylan replied with a smile, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." At that moment, I was captivated by Dylan's smile. Eventually, the copier couldn't be fixed, but Dylan arranged for a replacement machine. Thanks to that, the documents were completed in time, and the meeting went smoothly. Attracted to Dylan, I continued to approach him. I asked for his phone number and frequently contacted him. Finally, I confessed to Dylan, and we started dating. Dylan was very kind during our relationship, always showing consideration. I never saw him angry. I felt that even if he knew the real me, he would continue to treat me warmly. With that thought, I boldly proposed to Dylan 3 months after we started dating. He immediately accepted, and I was truly happy with his response. However, there was one thing that worried me. It was about my appearance. I had worn thick glasses for a long time. Even on dates, I always chose modest clothes. It was a long-standing habit that was hard to change. In reality, I look very much like my father. With distinct facial features, I was often envied by girls during middle school. Boys also judged me by my appearance, leading to painful experiences. But with Dylan, I thought there would surely be no problem. Going forward, especially for the sake of my beloved Dylan, I had been contemplating changing my appearance gradually. I kept this thought to myself, but after our engagement, I started feeling increasingly uneasy. Dylan had seemed very kind before our engagement, but lately he had begun to look down on me with disdainful words and actions. Recently, we went to a bridal fair to decide on a venue for our wedding. The suggestion came from Dylan, and I went there at his invitation. The place he took me to was a glamorous world. It was a luxurious guest house suitable for a large wedding with over 100 guests. Seeing this, I could not hide my surprise. Since my student days, I have had few close friends, and I wanted to avoid standing out, so I had hoped for a wedding at a small venue. Honestly, I wanted to leave immediately. However, Dylan was enjoying the moment, and I couldn't say anything. Thus, I endured the time patiently. After the tour of the wedding venues, we took a break at a cafe. Dylan was in a very good mood. The wedding venue we just saw was wonderful. Personally, I prefer a more glamorous ceremony, Dylan said while drinking his coffee. It seemed like we might end up choosing the earlier venue. In a hurry, I expressed my desire for the type of ceremony I wanted. I think a quiet ceremony wouldn't be bad either. I especially don't like standing out. I believed that the kind Dylan would listen to my wish. However, that was not the reality. Dylan glanced at me and laughed mockingly. Indeed, for someone modest like you, a flashy ceremony like that might not be suitable. Besides, is there even a dress that would fit your thick glasses? What I was puzzled by his words. But a wedding is about uniting families. My family is wealthy, and we need to have a ceremony of a certain standard. I was at a loss for words. The once gentle Dylan had suddenly started to look down on me. This change deeply hurt me. And to my confused self, Dylan added more cutting remarks. You should just keep quiet and follow my instructions. You should be grateful that someone plain like you can marry me. Dylan said this suddenly with a serious expression. I was speechless. Dylan's cold expression even made me feel scared. However, right after that, Dylan said with a smile, I'll decide everything. You just need to say yes and follow me. Got it? Yes? I didn't know how to respond and could only smile in confusion. Maybe my engagement to Dylan was a mistake. But now, it's too late to change the past. I have already announced our marriage plans to my workplace and parents. Still, I continue to love Dylan. Perhaps the kind Dylan I knew before the engagement will return someday. Nevertheless, Dylan continued with his harsh words. Each time, my heart was slowly getting hurt. Still, I couldn't bring myself to dislike Dylan. Even when I think about separating from Dylan, memories of the kind Dylan remain in my heart. I still deeply love Dylan. Confused, I continued our engagement. Then one day something happened that confused me even more. It was the day Dylan made formal arrangements at the wedding venue. After visiting several venues, Dylan chose the luxurious guest house we first visited. He confidently declared, after all, a luxurious ceremony suits me. It might be a bit too much for you, though. Dylan laughed, hurting my heart. After that, we headed to that guest house to proceed with the wedding venue arrangements. On the way, I encountered an unexpected person. Dylan. Mom, why are you here? Dylan was surprised to see her. Then, Dylan introduced her to me. Ashley, this is my mother. Mom, this is Ashley White, my fiancée I've told you about. His mother greeted me with a smile. So, you're Dylan's fiancée. You seem very serious. Where do you work? It must surely be a top company. This meeting was my first encounter with her. I replied nervously, I work in a clerical position at Simpson Machinery. Upon hearing this, she looked puzzled. Simpson Machinery? Where is that? Dylan joined the conversation. Simpson Machinery is one of my clients, a small company with about 30 employees. It's no wonder you don't know it. Hearing Dylan's explanation, she frowned. I thought your fiancé would be working at a more prestigious company. Such a small company doesn't pay much, does it? Are you planning to trouble Dylan? I'm sorry. Indeed, I don't earn a high salary at my current job. Therefore, I had no choice but to apologize to her. She took a deep breath and said, Anyway, I want you to stop depending on Dylan. Our family has a long history. We can't have someone of unknown origin troubling us. Yes. While I nodded in confusion at her words, she grew more heated and continued, First of all, what kind of people are your parents? Do they work for a reputable company? She interrogated me angrily. My father is. As I hesitated to answer, My eyes were drawn to her purse because there was a familiar item on it. Seeing me silent, Dylan spoke up. "Mom, calm down. We'll soon bring Ashley over for a formal introduction." "Well, I'm not particularly looking forward to it." She glared at me unhappily. Apparently, her first impression of me was very poor. The path to marriage seemed more difficult than I had thought, and I quietly sighed. Then, the day of the family dinner arrived. Wow. Standing in front of Dylan's family home, I was amazed and murmured. The view was beyond my imagination. Since his mother had mentioned a noble lineage, I knew Dylan's family was wealthy. But the reality was beyond my imagination. There was a large automatic gate and even an elevator installed inside the house. Outside, there were more than 10 luxury cars lined up, most of them foreign cars. This was probably his father's hobby. Dylan began speaking to me in a light tone. "My father isn't home today because of work. It's just Mom, so everything will be as usual." Even though Dylan was smiling, my expression stiffened because of the harsh words I had received from her before. I was sure I would receive some kind of sarcasm today as well. With that anxiety, I followed Dylan to the living room where his mother was waiting. "Excuse us. About the other day." I said this to her. Right after that, she uttered an unbelievable phrase. "Welcome, my slave." Knowing that I was coming to give my greeting to her family formally, these were the first words she said. I couldn't believe my ears and exclaimed in surprise. She smiled while observing me closely. "Oh? With such a poor-looking expression, weren't you a slave after all? I just needed someone I could use for free." "What do you mean by slave?" Her words were painful to hear. Then she burst out laughing gleefully. "I heard from Dylan. He said it's okay to treat you like a slave. It seems Dylan just wanted a submissive person to marry. Poor you." "Dylan, what is this?" Shocked, I questioned Dylan. This must be a joke. I wanted to believe it was. However, Dylan, who was supposed to support me, showed an unbelievable betrayal. Glancing at my face, Dylan chuckled. "You look like a pauper. I'd like to see what your parents look like." Saying this, Dylan continued laughing loudly. "Having someone to obey me unconditionally is attractive, isn't it? Anyway, if your parents come to a wealthy household like ours, they would probably faint." Dylan and his mother continued to despise me. Then she threw a malicious question with a sneer. "By the way, what kind of job does your father have? He's not unemployed, is he?" "There's no way." Dylan responded to his mother while laughing loudly. "Mom, that's not even a job. It's clear Ashley's parents don't have a regular job." "Oh, I'm laughing so hard it hurts." Dylan and his mother continued to look down on my parents. They made assumptions about their low education and modest appearance. I was furious and gritted my teeth as I listened to their words. I could not tolerate their disrespectful attitude. Being insulted like this was more than I could bear. Unnoticed by them, I secretly sent a message to my father. "Please come right now." As I sent the message, I also sent my father the map I had previously received from Dylan. Today was supposed to be my father's day off. He would be relaxing. Fortunately, my father replied immediately, "I'm on my way." Seeing my father's reply, I felt a bit relieved. Then, I addressed Dylan and his mother. "I need to get some fresh air outside." I could no longer endure their cutting words. I decided to wait quietly outside until my father arrived. It was at that moment. "That's good then. Now Dylan, let's continue our coffee, just the two of us." She seemed pleased to be alone with Dylan. "Ashley, don't run away." Dylan's loud laughter echoed as I left the scene and waited for my father. 10 minutes later, my father appeared, wearing dark sunglasses. "Ashley, what's wrong? Weren't you supposed to be at your fiance's house for a marriage greeting today? I was surprised when you suddenly called me," my father asked with a puzzled expression. "Dad, I can't take it anymore." Hearing those words, I was relieved and began to cry. The tears wouldn't stop. "What happened, Ashley?" My father started to panic seeing me cry. I told him everything that had happened, how Dylan's behavior had changed after our engagement, and how his mother had conspired to demean me. "It's unbearable to hear them mock you even though they didn't even know you," I said through my tears. My father listened quietly to my story, a calm anger visible on his face. Then, I told him something about Dylan's mother. At that moment, my father chuckled softly, took off his sunglasses, and handed them to me. "Let's go inside. It's time to make those who hurt you regret their actions," he said. With these words, I firmed up my resolve. My feelings for Dylan had completely vanished, replaced only by a desire for revenge. "I've made up my mind too. I will definitely make them regret this," I declared as I put on the sunglasses my father handed me. We then headed back inside Dylan's family home. Appearing before them, my father and I stood confidently. "We've kept you waiting," I announced with the sunglasses on, and Dylan looked bewildered. "Why the sunglasses all of a sudden?" he asked, unable to hide his confusion. His mother, who had been smiling slyly at first, was shocked to see my father beside me. It was the first time I saw someone freeze in shock. She might have been planning to say something when I returned, but her plans were thwarted. I was ready to push her into an abyss of regret. She must have already known the true identity of my father. My father quietly addressed her. "So, I'm the father of the slave." His voice was calm, but there was no smile in his eyes, and his handsome features seemed even more imposing. "What?" his mother exclaimed, surprised. Seeing my father, her face stiffened in astonishment. Why is Tony here? Is this some kind of joke?" She was clearly flustered. Her cheeks tinged slightly red, and she even looked somewhat pleased. Her eyes sparkled, almost like those of a young girl. Dylan was too stunned to grasp the situation. Without responding to her question, my father simply observed Dylan and his mother. She met my father's gaze and seemed embarrassed, which looked rather comical. I observed the scene calmly. Then, a slightly composed Dylan asked Tony, "Is he an acquaintance of yours, Mom?" It seemed Dylan was not yet aware of who my father was. My father was quite well known among his mother's generation, but perhaps not so much among the younger ones. At that moment, she gave Dylan a stern look. "Dylan, don't say such disrespectful things. This is Tony White, a famous actor, and my first love." "Really?" Dylan responded incredulously. Ace's mother quickly turned back to my father, smiling joyfully. "I'm a huge fan of yours, Tony. Look at this." She hurriedly pulled something from her bag and showed it to my father. "This is a keychain I got from your fan club. Actually, I've been a huge fan of yours for many years." She declared her enthusiastic fandom to my father. "Mom." Dylan was baffled by her sudden change. She continued to talk eagerly to my father, clearly excited to have her favorite actor right in front of her. However, my father's expression as he watched her was very stern. Then, breaking his silence, he finally spoke. "I understand you are a fan of mine. However, it's true that you tried to treat my daughter, Ashley, like a slave, isn't it?" "What?" She was taken aback by this sudden reference to reality, and her expression changed dramatically. Her face paled with fear, and her body started to tremble slightly. Ignoring that, my father continued sternly. "Moreover, it is extremely rude to label someone you have never met as unemployed." At my father's words, she began to visibly shake. "No, I didn't know that you're Ashley's father, Tony. If I had known, I would have truly welcomed him into the family, right, Dylan?" Yes." Dylan seemed pressured by his mother's insistence. Meanwhile, she was desperately making excuses to my father. I was dismayed by the scene. Until my father arrived, she had looked down on both my father and me, but she completely changed her attitude upon seeing him. I could only feel disappointed by her contradictory behavior. "Upon closer inspection, Ashley does resemble you and is very attractive. My earlier words were just out of jealousy, fearing that my son might be taken away. If I had known it was you, Tony, I would have shown much more respect." She was desperately trying to make a good impression on my father. My father could hardly hide his irritation at her behavior. Witnessing the exchange, I made my decision. I could not let my father bear this burden any longer. I had to resolve this issue myself. So I declared to her, "This ends my engagement with Dylan. I will not become part of your family." "What? Ashley, please forgive my unfortunate words. I can't bear the thought of losing the chance to be a family with Tony. Please reconsider." She tried to persuade me while holding back tears, but given her past behavior, I couldn't trust her words. I calmly looked back at her. However, She seemed to still hope that I might change my mind. She turned to me and smiled warmly. Ashley, you do want to marry Dylan, don't you? From now on, I won't oppose it, and there's no need to worry. I will accept anything about you. She was frantically appealing for a family with my father and me, despite her previous statements. Her willingness to agree to anything now was completely opposite to her earlier words. I even felt contempt for her as she kept changing her stance. I said quietly, I refuse. What did you say? She seemed unable to catch my words and tilted her head. Then, I said more clearly and forcefully, I absolutely do not want to be a part of your family. What did you say? She was startled by my loud voice and looked confused. I confronted her with the depth of my feelings. All you did was disparage the place where I work, right? And you said horrible things about my father too. I can't forgive that. I made my feelings clear to her. She realized it was futile to persuade me further and turned to look at my father. She then started speaking kindly to him. Ashley says so, but, Tony, you also wish for your daughter's happiness, right? We have assets, and she can be happy with us. Certainly, some people think that money can buy happiness. But my view is different. Perhaps sensing my feelings, my father voiced his opposition. Ashley values love more than money, and don't worry, our family has sufficient funds. I earn a decent income as an actor. She was at a loss for words. It's no wonder, given that my father is a well-known actor who appears frequently in dramas. He earns a significant income and we are not financially struggling. Our family is wealthy, so we do not see the value in a marriage based only on money. Perhaps realizing this fact, she fell silent. She probably couldn't think of another strategy. My father broke the silence and continued, I know you say you're a fan of mine, but I dislike anyone who makes my precious daughter sad. Please don't claim to be a fan anymore. She started to cry under my father's stern gaze. I can't go on living if you dislike me, Tony. At this point, Dylan, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Don't think you can say whatever you want. Ashley, if you break off our engagement, you'll regret it. An ordinary woman like you won't be sought after by anyone. Dylan laughed mockingly. Hey, Dylan. Stop it. His mother tried to intervene in front of my father. But Dylan was not inclined to stop. I chose someone submissive like you from the beginning because I wanted a woman like a slave. I planned to have fun with other attractive women after getting married. How frustrating. He rambled on about things no one asked him to. Clearly, Dylan had no love for me. He just wanted to marry a woman who would be convenient for him. My love for Dylan had already disappeared. As these thoughts crossed my mind, Dylan continued his self-centered ramblings. You. My father clenched his teeth, looking like he might attack Dylan at any moment. This was my chance to fight back. Dad, just wait. Saying that, I stopped my father. I smiled slightly while still wearing my sunglasses. What's the matter? Dylan seemed unsettled by my composed smile. Do you still think I'm plain? As I spoke, I swiftly removed the sunglasses I was wearing, which belonged to my father. What? Dylan stared at my face in shock. His surprise was understandable. With the sunglasses off, I was fully made up. Normally, I only wear foundation, but at that time I had also applied eyeshadow, mascara, and eyeliner. In fact, this makeup was done right after my father arrived and I had shed some tears. It was just eye makeup, but it dramatically transformed my appearance. Is this the real you? Dylan's face turned slightly red. He must have been enchanted, staring at my face, which now stood out with makeup. Yes, exactly. I used to downplay my appearance because I didn't want to stand out, but I'm done hiding. Up until now, I had unconsciously stood out because of my father's influence. That's why I had intentionally behaved modestly. However, this resulted in Dylan and his mother criticizing me and my father. I decided that standing out a bit wasn't so bad if it meant not demeaning my father. That was my thought. Dylan, his face flushed, said, If you had been like this from the beginning, I would have been nicer to you. We can still repair our relationship. Let's call off the engagement cancellation right now. And, while we're at it, introduce me to some beautiful actresses through your father. Why should I call off the engagement cancellation now? Moreover, he audaciously requested to be introduced to actresses. I firmly told Dylan, The engagement is already a done deal. I no longer need you in my life. By the way, I've already canceled the reservation for the wedding venue." "What?" Dylan was stunned and lost for words. But I wasn't done yet. I pushed Dylan even further. "Of course, you should be the one to pay the cancellation fees for the wedding venue. It's only fair since you're the reason for the engagement breakup." His mother cried out in confusion. "Wait a minute. It's too much for him to bear the entire cost." Dylan, looking shocked, was unable to argue. At that moment, my father chimed in. "Shouldn't Dylan's father be the one to pay? He owns luxury cars, so it should be easy for him," my father suggested brightly with a laugh. Here, I used my last card. "If you're not satisfied, we can consider going to court. However, my father is a famous actor, and the news might provoke reactions from his passionate fans." My father has many ardent fans. Once, a critic who spoke ill of him faced severe consequences. Threatening phone calls and letters containing blades were just some of the impacts, which were significant. The incident was widely reported at the time. Remembering that, his mother's face turned pale. She desperately continued to persuade Dylan, "You should bear all the costs of the cancellation. Can you imagine what might happen otherwise?" Seeing his mother's expression, Dylan seemed to realize the severity of the situation. "Really?" Dylan collapsed to his knees, filled with despair. Dylan was no longer necessary in my life. "Let's go home, Dad." I left the scene with my father while glancing sideways at the slumped Dylan and his mother. As a result, my engagement with Dylan was dissolved. Dylan ended up paying all the cancellation fees for the wedding. His father is actually the president of a major company, and my father once appeared in advertisements for that company. Through this connection, my father reported the current situation to Dylan's father. Unaware of the ongoing events, he was furious. He then severely questioned Dylan and his wife. He strongly demanded that Dylan bear the full cost of the wedding cancellation fees. As a result, Dylan had to pay a huge amount. This also affected his mother. Due to her excessive spending and her treatment of us, Dylan's father declared divorce. She had been spending a lot on her fan activities for my father. The funds were coming out of her husband's pocket. He had also lost his love for her. In addition, my father exposed a passionate love letter she had sent him. "I want to get divorced and be with you, Tony. My current husband is just a source of money." Such words were written in the love letter addressed to my father, which triggered the outrage of Dylan's father. Though she showed resistance, the divorce was finalized through a lawyer. I heard rumors that she was crying, saying, "This is not what I expected." She was also expelled from my father's fan club. She had often been a nuisance before, and the expulsion seemed justified. After losing everything, it's unlikely that she will ever be happy again. I feel this is a result of her own making. Half a year later, Dylan was arrested due to his obsession with me. He couldn't forget the sight of me without my sunglasses and started showing up persistently. Even after resigning, he continued to wait outside my home and tried to contact me persistently. "Please be engaged with me again. I can't live without you," he pleaded tearfully over the phone, even though he only saw my real appearance briefly. He was surprised by the difference between my look before and after makeup, but I have no need for such a shallow man. I politely refused and cut off all further contact. However, Dylan's behavior intensified, and I consulted the police. I felt genuinely threatened, so after much distress, I ultimately decided to file a police report. My father agreed with this decision. Eventually, an incident occurred where Dylan forcefully entered our home, and he was arrested. As a result of the arrest, I heard that Dylan lost his job. Now all he has are his significant debts. His future will likely be challenging, probably because of his habit of looking down on others. This is truly poetic justice. Afterwards, I took a job as my father's manager. Unlike my previous clerical role, I faced many challenges. I manage my father's schedule, handle greetings and responses at sites, and sometimes negotiate salaries. I used to commute between the office and home, spending most of my time in front of a computer, but now my work primarily involves interacting with people. These days are completely different from my past experiences, but I find them very enjoyable. The job of a manager is glamorous, but that's not all there is to it. My main role is to support my father so he can focus on his acting. The working hours are irregular, requiring flexibility. Above all, the best part of this job is being able to support my father up close. To dispel previous worries, I want to give back. This new job is just beginning, and many challenges await. Nevertheless, I am continuing to work positively, spending my days by my father's side. I have decided to keep Nicole and my thoughts in my own way. I'm going to eat steak, which Nicole loved, with Mom. Since Mom is also weakened by a cold, I think she will feel better after eating meat. Despite it being the day of Nicole's funeral, Jeff did not show up. I tried to contact him multiple times and finally got to talk to him, but he said something unbelievable. Who does he think caused Nicole's death? There's no use talking to Jeff, who lacks as a human being and as a parent. It only brings more pain and deepens my hatred towards Jeff. It's not just me who is boiling with anger. My father feels the same. Shall we send that guy to hell? While Jeff was absent, we sent Nicole safely to heaven. Next is Jeff's turn. I'll make sure to send him to hell and crush him. I am Kelly Baker, a housewife in my 30s. My daughter, Nicole, just turned 3. Hey, Mom, I want to go to the big pool again. Ah, the pool? Yes, pools are fun. Our family consists of Nicole, my husband Jeff, and me. We love going out. Ever since Nicole was born, Jeff had been planning fun outings every week. However, since Nicole turned 3, the bond of our close-knit family has been gradually breaking. What, you want to go to that big pool again? No, let's go to the museum instead. Let's see the big dinosaurs. As I feared, Jeff hesitated to go to the pool. So, it's come to this, I sighed softly. Until recently, Jeff would have been delighted to take Nicole to the pool whenever she asked. But now his reaction was completely different. Lately, he has been ignoring Nicole's wishes and taking her to places he wants to go. Little Nicole easily changes her opinion to, I want to see the dinosaurs. If that's okay with Nicole, the museum is fine, but it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Are we not going to the pool anymore? When I asked quietly, Jeff nodded as if it were obvious. Yes, that's right. We went there often until you were 3 because it was indoors and enjoyable even in winter, but that's enough now. The reason we can't go to Nicole's favorite places anymore was that it was no longer worth it. The pool was free until age 3, but starting at age 4, there is a fee. Jeff always liked discounts and perks, even picking up free pocket tissues handed out on the street, and sometimes he even went back and forth to get multiple ones. He also chose restaurants where coupons could be used, and even though he really wanted to eat sirloin steak, he usually opted for chicken, which usually had a coupon. It might seem like we're financially tight, but since Nicole was born, his frugality has become extreme, and he's sometimes called stingy. Children are cost-effective. I want to give Nicole lots of experiences during this time. Jeff finds spots for children that are free or discounted and takes us there. We've experienced trips by airplane, visits to observation towers, aquariums, and zoos. Many memories have been made. I was grateful to Jeff. However, I never imagined that once Nicole turned 3 and the discounts no longer applied, he would suddenly stop taking us to such places. It was still good during early childhood. Even if we could no longer go to the beloved pool or amusement parks, there were still many fun outing spots and restaurants. But as she entered elementary school, the deals Jeff looked for almost disappeared. We're going to the park today, so get ready quickly. Mom, make lunch, okay? Hurry up, Jeff would say. The destinations were always free entry parks. It was hard on my heart that after taking us to so many places, it suddenly ended when she entered elementary school. I talked with Jeff after Nicole went to bed. Let's take Nicole to a place she wants to go at least once a month. I feel sorry for her, I suggested. Huh? That again? What do you think I've been doing all this time playing with Nicole? I've entertained her enough while it was cheap, so that's plenty. I've provided Nicole with a lifetime of fun, Jeff responded. Jeff was always stubborn, and there was no hope of compromise. Now that regular fees applied, it seemed like a big loss to Jeff. Previously, Jeff, who took us around a lot while discounts were available, seemed satisfied with that situation. Jeff's frugality was growing stronger day by day. "Huh, Nicole, are you feeling bad?" one day Jeff, who had just returned from work, said upon seeing Nicole lying in bed. "Yes, she seems to have a fever, so I let her skip school. She just took her medicine and fell asleep," I replied, and gestured for silence by putting a finger to my lips. In the next moment, I heard a surprising click of the tongue from Jeff, who was staring at Nicole's suffering face. "Don't go to the hospital just for a cold," Jeff said angrily. I quickly pulled Jeff away from Nicole. "Nicole is resting, so please be quiet," I said in a low voice. "Huh? Why do I have to listen only to what you say? You were the first to betray," Jeff retorted grumpily. Jeff stomped his feet, visibly upset. "I told you before not to go to the hospital," he said, and I was surprised. I remembered Jeff lamenting that he could no longer take Nicole to the hospital. This year, the medical subsidy Nicole had been receiving was no longer available. It was a big loss, but Jeff's income has increased, and he seemed somewhat satisfied, though confused. "Do you really mean that?" I was shocked. Hospital expenses and leisure were completely different. It was cruel to force a child to endure suffering because free medical care was no longer available. It's not something to react so dramatically to if it's just a cold. If taking medicine could make her feel better right away, it would be another story. But she can't even get out of bed yet. Is it worth going to the hospital just to pay high treatment costs? He pressured me. I lost my words to his force, and when commanded loudly, I had no choice but to obey. I had the desire to argue, but doing so would only provoke Jeff's anger further. Rather than trying to make Jeff understand, I just wanted him to be quiet. When I stayed silent, Jeff smugly boasted, "That's why I told you, unnecessary medical care isn't good. People like you, who don't think things through, are burdening the healthcare system. A cold will heal with rest, and injuries will heal naturally. Don't coddle Nicole," he asserted. Jeff sounded reasonable, but until last year, he was adamant that even a slight fever should be treated at the hospital right away. Naturally, when medical costs were free, it was more economical than buying over-the-counter medications. Well, there's something to be said for increasing salaries too. It's like working at a loss. How great would it be if I could adjust my salary just enough to not cover the cost of the kids' medical bills? What if I could secretly receive about half of my salary? He grumbled. "That's not realistic, is it?" "I understand that much. It was just a joke. You don't get jokes, do you? You lack flexibility. You and the company are both so mediocre," Jeff said, sneering at me with contempt. When did it happen? When did our relationship stop being equal? By the way, why don't you start working too? You're just lazing around at home while Nicole is at school, right? Stop thinking about wanting to go out or take her to the hospital. Currently, I am a full-time housewife. When Nicole was born, Jeff changed jobs. When I quit my job due to my pregnancy, Jeff declared he would earn more, and at that time, he seemed very dependable. With his new job came an increase in income, and Jeff wanted me to stay at home. His words infuriated me, as if I'd been slacking off all this time. "Well, you've got a gap in your work history, so you can only do simple jobs. But with that, you could earn enough for Nicole's steak. I'd love to go to an all-you-can-eat steak place again. I'm fine because I earn the money. Since I bring in the income, I decide how to spend it. It's too late to start working now. I could never match Jeff's income." I strongly felt he was looking down on me. Maybe Jeff's job change was a mistake. Although his income increased, his attitude became more domineering. I was the one who suggested the job change, but I knew he struggled in the new environment. Understood. I'll start working. This situation forced me back into work, but actually it suited me. Jeff strictly limited the money he allowed me to use, and he disliked it when I went out using the allowance I received from my father. So earning my own money would allow me to provide Nicole with enjoyable times freely. Despite my resolve to return to work, things didn't go as planned. "Look," Nicole missed school again. "Lucky you could take off work too. I'm jealous," he would say. Not long after I returned to work, Nicole caught a cold, and her class was closed due to influenza, among other troubles. I truly regretted causing trouble at my new workplace. Can you even earn enough for steak with that? Don't worry, I'll take her to the steak place and the pool." Aware of how distorted my face must have looked, Jeff made an unbelievable suggestion. Shall we go to the all-you-can-eat steak then? Let's invite my parents too." A sharp pain shot through my back teeth. "I see your father often, but not so much my parents. Do something filial with your first paycheck, will you?" Blood rushed to my head, and I was left speechless. I didn't want Nicole in the next room to hear her parents arguing. Such thoughts tighten around my heart. "It's impossible. I don't want to go." Is that so? Well, it's okay. Dining out with 4 adults and a school-aged child at a steak place is quite expensive. It wasn't just about the money, or rejecting the idea of showing filial piety to Jeff's parents, that made me hesitant to go to the steak restaurant. I've begun to find Jeff himself unacceptable. Since realizing this, I've seriously considered divorce and plan to discuss it with my father. Right after making such a decision, Nicole caught a cold again. Raising a child often meant facing the reality that things don't go according to plan. Nicole's symptoms were a mild cough and a slight fever, but as I took care of her, I caught the infection and developed a fever myself. It was not uncommon for a parent who gets infected to end up bedridden, even if the child recovered quickly. "Nicole, how are you feeling?" By evening, Nicole's fever seemed to spike suddenly. Noticing her face was flushed, I touched her and found her temperature was abnormally high. Her fever is so high. She was still fine during the day. Nicole's eyes were unfocused, and my heart raced with the urgency to take her to the hospital right away. Unfortunately, today was the first day of a 3-day weekend, and it was late at night. "What, you want to take her to the hospital now? Isn't that an overreaction for just a mere fever?" I tried asking Jeff for help, but as expected, his response was typical. "We can go to the hospital after the holiday. Going now would mean paying holiday and late-night fees. Just sleep it off, it's just a cold." And was he really seeing what was happening with Nicole? Nicole wasn't complaining and seemed to be fading out of consciousness. Because of her sluggish response, I was desperate. "Don't worry, I'll pay for all the treatment costs. Just please take her to the hospital. Please, I'm begging you." Normally, I'd carry her to the hospital myself, but alone, I wasn't strong enough. It was humiliating to plead to someone I was considering divorcing, but for Nicole's sake, nothing else mattered. "All right, I understand." After much pleading, Jeff finally agreed. "They'll probably just say it's just a cold at the hospital, give us some pills and send us home." Jeff might get angry, but I've already decided on divorce. I didn't care what he said anymore. If he complained about wasting money, I'd slam a $100 note on the table. Thinking this, I closed my eyes. Soon I heard hurried, thumping sounds. Too quick for a return from the hospital. The person who burst into the room was Jeff. Seeing the pallor of his face sent a chill down my spine. Something's wrong with Nicole. At that moment, it felt like everything was over. Nicole was only 7 years old. Such a young life, only 7, full of hope for the future, was no longer in this world. That night when Nicole had a high fever, Jeff did not go to the hospital. Pretending to listen to me, he judged on his own that it would be okay and let her go back to sleep. However, her condition changed rapidly, and she soon passed away. It was like a nightmare. Unable to comprehend the reality, I found no words to blame Jeff. While I was stunned, my father took care of various procedures, but it all felt so surreal. Despite the upcoming funeral for Nicole, I felt numb. "Kelly, I know it's hard, but you need to pull yourself together. You understand it's an important day to send off Nicole, don't you?" His words brought me back to reality. If Nicole were watching me from somewhere, showing her such a state wouldn't let her depart to heaven in peace. As a mother, I wanted to do everything I possibly could for her. "Thank you, Dad. You're right. If I just cry, Nicole will be worried," I responded. "That's right. Nicole's grandmother is also in heaven. She'll surely spend a wonderful time with her granddaughter, whom she is meeting for the first time. Also, try to contact Jeff. I can't get through to him no matter how many times I call," my father added. Jeff had taken Nicole's death very hard and has been shut away at his parents' home since the day of the incident. Even if he isn't here by my side, I'm not worried about it. My father seemed to feel a distance in our relationship as a married couple, but he was too tired from the grief of losing a grandchild and had no room to talk about it in detail. Just as my father said, I looked around and Jeff was nowhere to be seen. His parents weren't there either. I've thought over and over, if only we had gone to the hospital at that time. Jeff must be suffering too. He might be in such a state of mind that he can't come here. However, I felt too sad that Jeff, Nicole's father, wasn't here for her funeral. I called Jeff's phone multiple times, but it was just ringing endlessly. Finally, after several tries, the call connected. "Why are you calling so much? It's annoying." Jeff's voice was restless and clearly irritable. I was considering what to say to him, but I didn't need to worry about that. His tone was sharp, clearly frustrated. I raised my voice in response. "Jeff, where are you? It's about to start Nicole's funeral." My father noticed and approached, gesturing to ask if I was talking to Jeff. I nodded, and my father leaned in to hear Jeff's response. "Oh, but it's impossible for me to come." Jeff's words were a bit choked, but he continued without concern. "Mom has caught a cold and is in the hospital." "What?" Both my father and I couldn't hide our surprise. Unaware that my father was listening next to me, Jeff continued. "The funeral, huh? It's supposed to be a small ceremony, but your father will probably make a big deal out of it. Is that really for Nicole? Isn't it just for show? It's really a waste." My father was visibly shaken as if he had been deeply wounded. Jeff's words surely meant that he wasn't as depressed as we had thought. Having already given up on any expectations from Jeff, I was still shockingly unsettled by his actions. I lost the energy to call him to the funeral. "Do you ignore Nicole but rush to the hospital for your mother, huh?" I couldn't help but let out a sarcastic remark. "What? My mother is old. It's not the same as a child's cold that can heal with sleep," Jeff retorted. "But Nicole." I tried to continue, but Jeff interrupted loudly. "That's why I'm saying I'm reflecting too. It's hard for me too. It's not just you who's suffering." His words were laden with emotion. There's no point in saying anything to Jeff, who lacks as a human being and as a parent. He only causes pain and deepens my hatred for him. I'll keep Nicole and my thoughts in my own way. I'm going to eat steak with Mom, Nicole's favorite. Since Mom has caught a cold and is weak, I think the meat will make her feel better. Yeah, to avoid making waves, tell your father Jeff is mentally distressed and bedridden. My father patted my shoulder as I was dumbfounded by Jeff's words. My father shook his head silently, his expression saying, "Don't get involved anymore." My father took the mobile from me, and the call was immediately cut off. I wanted to curse at Jeff, but it was frustrating that I couldn't find the right words. I wanted to cry only for Nicole, but I couldn't stop my tears of anger towards Jeff. "You don't need to cry for that man. First, let's properly send off Nicole, and then we can really make him cry." I could feel my father's anger burning behind him like a flame. That was when I finally understood. I didn't need to bear the grief of losing Nicole and the anger towards Jeff alone. Even without Jeff, we were able to send Nicole safely to heaven. "Shall we send that guy hello?" Next was Jeff's turn. "I'll make sure to send him to hell and crush him." After taking proper bereavement leave, Jeff returned to work from his parents' place. Slightly hunched and dragging his feet heavily, yet he forced a smile on the right half of his face. A father, grieving the loss of his daughter, trying desperately to look forward, would seem valiant to anyone who didn't know better. "I'm sorry for suddenly taking time off. Ha." Jeff apologized to everyone as soon as he returned to his department. His forced laughter somehow seemed painful. His colleagues were also unsure how to interact with him, and the atmosphere became awkward. Sorry for being off for so long," Jeff said to a colleague near the window as he walked to his seat. "Was everything okay with work? I'll make up for the time off," he said with forced cheerfulness as he sat down. The employees looked uneasy and confused about how to respond to him. Jeff mistakenly thought their awkward glances were out of sympathy. Haha, sorry to worry you. As you can see, I'm fine. So, don't look so gloomy. Let's get back to work, he said, clapping his hands to signal the restart of work. Jeff was the department head, having risen rapidly in the ranks within just 7 years after switching jobs. He appeared to be a commendable leader who behaved confidently even in tough situations. Boss? I stammered a junior employee. Jeff smiled briefly at the concern shown by his colleagues but soon dropped his shoulders, smiling sadly. It's okay, don't worry. I'm fine now. It's really sad about the child, but the illness couldn't be helped. My wife and I are both in our 30s, there's still hope. The best way to overcome grief is to welcome a new life. For that, I need to work hard and earn money. Let's focus on our work, he continued. No matter how well Jeff played the role of a good father or boss, his words lacked sincerity. He was completely oblivious to why the mood was so somber. Seeing this, I stood up. Hey Kelly, why are you here? Jeff exclaimed in surprise. While Jeff wallowed in self-pity, I had been quietly observing his actions from the corner of the room. He was looking down, filled with guilt. And no wonder, since Nicole's death, we hadn't faced each other properly. Jeff had fled to his parents' home, avoiding any contact with me. Please leave this place. If my wife intrudes like this, it will be hard for everyone to concentrate on their work, Jeff said in a low voice. I responded calmly. Why should I leave? I am entitled to be here just as much as anyone else. Being an employee, there shouldn't be a problem wherever I am. Jeff bit his lip. In reality, I also worked at the same company as Jeff. Because he had been avoiding it, I had stayed away from his department until now, but there was a reason I stood here today. Actually, Jeff, you are the one who should leave. Your presence here is a hindrance to work. What? Jeff looked up in surprise, his face meeting mine. His face, which I hadn't seen in a long time, looked perfectly healthy, without a trace of fatigue. You've been fired, to put it simply. Jeff, you no longer have a place in this company. Please leave now. Well, what? Fired? Why? You don't have the right to decide that. Jeff's face trembled with shock. His voice cracked, increasing his pitiful appearance. Just then, the door opened and a person walked in. I have the authority to fire you. It was my father. Jeff, somehow sensing this moment would come, collapsed weakly. My father spoke calmly, yet his voice was cold and slow. You are fired. Jeff felt the gravity of those words and turned pale. Indeed, both Jeff and I worked for the company that my father ran. My mother had passed away before I got married, and I had only my father who always prioritized work. Perhaps that was just the right amount of distance for Jeff. Occasionally, when the three of us, my husband, father, and I met, my father would always tell me, Jeff is a good pillar of support for the family. He's also doing well at his job. It's important to respect and support each other moving forward. Jeff conveniently interpreted this to mean, as the head of the household, I deserve respect. But what my father really meant was, both spouses are struggling daily with work and parenting, and they should appreciate and support each other. My father had loved my mother deeply, sharing household chores actively. I'm worried about your hands getting rough, so I'll do the dishes, he would say, always taking charge of cleaning the dishes. If you didn't know this side of my father, it's understandable if he seemed at least like the stereotypical strict parent of the past. Jeff believed he had inherited the mistaken belief from my father that men are superior. He thought he was unconditionally supported simply because he was a man. He could be overbearing towards me at times, but as long as he behaved well in front of my father, he thought that was enough. However, reality was not so forgiving. You are no longer needed. Suddenly getting fired by the man he believed in, Jeff couldn't accept the reality. He avoided my father's stern gaze and looked around, but no colleague offered him a sympathetic look. Jeff had thought they were sympathizing with him, but he was completely mistaken. His firing had already been notified to the entire company. Jeff had not doubted that his seat was still there, so the shock when he learned the truth was profound. This can't be. Cornered, Jeff trembled and choked on his words. It seemed he might make an excuse or apologize, but unexpectedly, he took a defiant stance. "This is wrongful termination. Kelly has lied to everyone and made me out to be the villain." Jeff began to argue passionately, tears in his eyes. "To distract from the pain of losing Nicole, you sacrificed me. Nicole's sudden illness was beyond anyone's control. Why am I made out to be the villain? We both lost a child. You are not the victim." Jeff repeated his words vehemently, out of breath. No matter how loudly he shouted, my heart was unmoved. Yes, I am not the victim. The real victim is Nicole. I had already discussed this fact with my father. I had no intention of explaining the details to the people at work, but since Jeff brought up the topic himself, I had no choice. Nicole was suffering from a high fever, and I begged you to take her to the hospital. But you refused because you wanted to save on medical costs. You abandoned Nicole over a small amount of money. If you had taken her to the hospital sooner, maybe Nicole might have. The meeting room started to buzz. It's not true. It's not my fault. It was night, and it was during a 3-day weekend. Going to the hospital for just a fever would have been a nuisance. Jeff desperately tried to justify himself. However, this backfired. Jeff was known for having a good public image. He used to talk about how tired he was after taking Nicole out, but it was worth it for his child's smile after the weekend. He even said he had taken her to the hospital before for a mild fever or minor injuries. Given his family-oriented nature, his excuse that it was just a fever was hard to believe. Thinking that he actually abandoned his own child deepened the contempt others felt for him. The trust Jeff had built up at work was beginning to crumble. In a state of despair, Jeff was extremely agitated. But, I didn't think Nicole was in serious condition, and to fire someone from the company over one mistake is cruel. It's an unjust dismissal using power. I'm a victim too. Certainly unforgivable mistakes do exist. However, the dismissal I carried out was not based on personal feelings. Even if Jeff played the tragic hero, everyone here knew the truth. They knew he missed his daughter's funeral, which should have been most important to him. Colleagues had attended Nicole's funeral and had questioned his absence. If he truly was deeply grieving, perhaps his absence could have been forgiven, but what was the reality? People at work saw you. They saw you eating happily at a steak restaurant on the day of the funeral. Jeff had gone to eat steak with his mother. He had said so over the phone, but I had thought it was a joke. However, after the funeral, people from work had spotted Jeff at the steak restaurant. They reported it to my father and me, saying they couldn't believe it. I felt ashamed and pathetic to think that such a person was my husband. No, what are you talking about? That's a mistake. I've been too upset to eat. I couldn't possibly eat steak. But that action proved his irresponsibility. There was no need for sympathy. Really, that's strange. Then what is this receipt? The receipt shown to Jeff at that moment had been submitted to the accounting department. You tried to pass it off as a business expense, but that's not possible. This isn't from a lunch with a client, right? And it's from the day of Nicole's funeral. As Jeff approached to snatch back the receipt, my father firmly held his shoulder. Jeff almost raised his fist but restrained himself when he noticed the stares around him. Jeff, the accounting staff have found personal receipts you've been submitting as expenses. They couldn't stand the guilt and reported it. There were many suspicious receipts, but no one dared to confront you, the future president. My father confronted Jeff emotionlessly. As a relative of the company's owner, you've taken quite a few liberties. It's truly disappointing. I had high hopes for you, Jeff, but I cannot entrust the company to someone who commits such fraud. No, I can't even keep employing you. There's no choice but to fire you. These words weighed heavily on Jeff, and his legs began to tremble. Jeff had been funding his personal dining and shopping with company money. There might have been some fun times, but the cost was immensely high. What's this, being accused one-sidedly? A couple of dollars for steak won't hurt anybody. What a stingy company. Fine, I'll resign. Jeff muttered bitterly. No matter how confident Jeff tried to appear, it was pathetically comical. The only looks he received were those of pity. Unable to stand the loneliness, Jeff shouted with a red face. That's enough. I'm leaving. He might have thought he was strong, but it was more like a child's tantrum. As he started to leave the room with heavy footsteps, I called out to him. "Leaving? To where?" Jeff turned around, his eyes visibly angry. "To my own home, of course," he answered as if it were obvious. It seemed he planned to drown his sorrows in drink at home. "If that's the case, you might as well go back to your parents' house. Our home doesn't exist anymore." "Huh?" His eyes blinked rapidly. His face filled with anger changed to a ridiculous expression in an instant. "I sold our house, so you can't go back there." "What? Why would you do something like that without asking?" "That house was where we had lived, and it was actually purchased by my father." "The house is in my name. I'm free to sell it, aren't I?" Jeff's face turned red with anger. "What? But to sell the house I lived in without telling me? That house is filled with precious family memories." Hearing him use the word family irritated me. It was unforgivable for him to use the precious family he had destroyed as an excuse now. "I can no longer live in that house filled with memories. Your superficial kindness can't possibly understand my feelings." Indeed, the house was filled with precious memories, as Jeff said. Because of that, every corner of the house reminded me of Nicole. Living normally in the same room without Nicole, who was no longer in this world, was impossible for me. But I have rights too. As Jeff clung to his claim, I presented him with a document. "Let's get a divorce." "What?" "I no longer need a future with you. Rights are not granted to those who do not wish for their child's happiness and turn away from responsibility." Compared to the life Nicole lost, Jeff's lost job, future position, social credit, and property were insignificant. Jeff should be grateful just for being healthy, yet he failed to understand even that and continued to be indignant. "Why? You're taking everything from me. Do you enjoy this?" "There's no joy in this." I dismiss his pleas coldly. Overwhelmed by excitement, Jeff left the room without any shame. Later, he would painfully realize the consequences of prioritizing money. After Nicole passed away, he initially felt depressed and seemed to feel some responsibility, but he soon fled to his parents' home for self-preservation. That was still forgivable until then. However, at the refuge of his parents, it seems he received astonishing encouragement. "Hey, what about Nicole's life insurance? We signed up for insurance before as a social obligation, right? I thought we wouldn't need Nicole's part, but well, you couldn't refuse it, could you? What's happening with it now?" A few days after the divorce, he contacted me to bring up such a topic. "Do you want the insurance money?" When I asked him directly, Jeff answered with a laugh. "Yeah, if I can get something, I definitely want it. If I don't say anything, you might monopolize it all, and that would be a bit much." I was so appalled that I was lost for words. As I remained silent, Jeff began to outline his plan. "Because of you, our family has suffered great damage. Originally, the plan was to have my parents move in to help you since you were weak, but then you went and sold the house. I hadn't been aware such a plan was underway, but now I feel it was right to have let the house go. Mom was really looking forward to living together, but you sold the house, divorced, and on top of that, lost your job. It's terrible what you've done. You won't need to give me severance or compensation, so please, at least give me the insurance money." His words conveyed not only anger towards me, but also desperation. Seeing through his desperation, Jeff tried to elicit sympathy by showing how cornered he felt. "Actually, my parents' house is a rental. I was shocked by being suddenly fired, so I decided to settle down at home for a bit. But then, the landlord showed up demanding payment of overdue rent. It seems his parents hadn't been paying the rent. Older couples are often treated with leniency, but with the addition of their son Jeff, the demands on them became stricter. How am I supposed to pay overdue rent without a job? But you have savings, right?" I retorted mercilessly, but I could hear Jeff snorting. "But you know, even if I pay the rent, I've been told we'll be kicked out, and the savings alone won't cover moving expenses." The savings were divided in half due to the divorce, and although I had forced him to return the money he had dishonestly acquired from the company, I avoided suing him. Despite this, he should still have about $10,000 left. Also, the house is rented, but my dad had made alterations to it himself. After paying the rent, we also need to pay for repairs. Fixing the walls he removed and the holes he made in the attic is going to be tough, right? $10,000 will be gone in no time. Huh. He was desperately pleading, but I could not feel any more emotions. Incidentally, the interior of the in-laws' house was quite unique and attractive. I was surprised to discover that the house was a rental property and that they had made unauthorized alterations. While the surface was attractive, it symbolized Jeff's poor essence. But it was clear that Jeff was raised by his parents. They too were self-centered, and their unreasonable behavior stood out. But all three of them together in a hopeless state would be preferable. By chance, I was the beneficiary of Nicole's life insurance. Jeff had been sarcastic when I couldn't refuse signing up for it at the time. As a result, he couldn't touch that money. So, you want to split Nicole's life insurance. I contracted it, paid the premiums from my savings, and I am the beneficiary. There's no way this money is going to you. I ended the conversation quickly and hung up. Calls from Jeff continued for a while, but it seemed he didn't have the courage to come to the company. Maybe he still had some sense of shame, or perhaps he didn't want to tarnish the memories of the times he was respected. Eventually, the calls from Jeff stopped abruptly. According to a colleague who heard through the grapevine, his parents' house was now back on the rental market. They had settled the unpaid rent and paid huge sum for repairs before leaving. Knowing this, thoughts like "I wonder how he's doing," or "he must be struggling" did not occur to me. So that's what happened. That was all. His present and future were irrelevant to me and of no interest. Even though I had impulsively cut ties with Jeff, the pain in my heart was still sharp. So the sense of liberation I expected after ending the relationship with him wasn't as profound as I had hoped. "Hey Kelly, why don't you take a break and go somewhere with me for a change?" That suggestion came from my father one day. Since the divorce, I had moved back home and continued working as usual, and life felt unchanged. But my father seemed to have noticed that I was feeling down. "I understand your pain, Kelly. As a parent, nothing is more important than one's child. I know you always wished for Nicole's happiness." My father's warm voice soothed my heart. "As a parent, I too want to see you happy and smiling." That made me realize I am Nicole's mother and also my father's daughter. When I looked up at my father, the warm smile I knew from childhood was there. "Kelly, let's spend some quality time together." "Yes, let's do that, Dad." What could heal my heart was indeed my father and the presence of family.